Ladies and gentlemen, please turn to the screen closest to you to view a short video on what standing tall is all about. Video crew, please. Mr. Peh Shing Huei to the stage to start things off. Mr. Peh, please.
Prime Minister and Mrs. Lee, ESM Goh and Mrs. Goh, Cabinet Ministers, former Cabinet Ministers, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here and online this evening. I began working on this book 4 years ago, or rather this project 4 years ago. Our original intention was to write one book. But it quickly became clear to me that it would be a very thick one, perhaps too thick. So I proposed to ESM to break it up into 2 volumes, and he agreed. In late 2018, we launched the first volume titled Tall Order. It has since been translated into simplified and traditional Chinese and Burmese. We also put out a children's edition called Panjan. They have all done well, selling a total of close to 40,000 copies in print, digital, and audio versions. Tall Order also won the Popular Reader's Choice Awards and was shortlisted for the Book of the Year at the Singapore Book Awards in 2019. So you can say that the book enjoyed both critical and commercial success. There's some pressure on Volume 2, but I'm confident the sequel will surpass the first volume. Standing Tall tells the story of ESM's 14 years as Prime Minister from 1990 to 2004. And in many ways, the first book was building up to this one. This is the main event, and a period in Singapore's history when the buck stopped with Mr. Goh. There were a lot of achievements as Singapore moved into the first world under his leadership. There were also lots of challenges for the new Prime Minister in a post-Cold War environment in the 1990s. So how did he cope with the double tragedies of both his deputy prime ministers being diagnosed with cancer? How did he bounce back from a far from ideal first January election, which led to strong rumors he was quitting? How did he expand Singapore's global footprints in a world where there was only one superpower? You will hear the backstory that led to the famous midnight golf game with US President Bill Clinton in Brunei. You will find out if it is true that for some 30 years, there was a persistent rumor in China that Mr. Goh gave China Premier Li Peng a heart attack. You will read about the witty exchanges between Mr. Goh and the late Nelson Mandela, who was released from prison in 1990 The same year, ESM became Prime Minister. The Goh Chok Tong years were packed with drama, adventure, and also lessons for Singapore in the new millennium. You will find them all in this book, from epidemic to elections, from trade agreements to terrorism. This book would not be possible without many people's help and support. First of all, I want to thank the Prime Minister and Mrs. Lee for being here today. Thank you very much. To my former boss at the Straits Times, Mr. Han Fuk Kwang, thank you for once again being the editorial advisor to this project, joining me and my team in all the interviews with ESM in Istana. I'm also delighted to reconnect with World Scientific Publishing. I'm confident that the able team under Max Phua will make this book another commercial and critical success. Today, we are launching both the English and Chinese editions, and all credit must go to translator Lim Wan Fei for rushing it out. She did a splendid job again. The title of a book is critical, and curiously, somehow, I've always failed to come up with the titles for my books. So this time, I got smart and asked an expert early on for a suggestion. The title, Standing Tall, was from our famous Singapore writer, Catherine Lim, and I would like to thank her here. I worked very closely with ESM's team on both Volume 1 and Volume 2. Without Yuan Siu Hong and Andre Ooi, there'll be no Standing Tall. And without Heng Ek Yao and Bernard Toh, there'll be no Tall Order. Most of all, without Marine Parade grassroots leader Kok Pak Chow, both books would not exist. Thank you for your relentless nagging. The books are better because you refuse to leave me alone. Last, I want to thank ESM Goh. This has been a wonderful journey over 4 years. I've learned so much from our interviews and conversations. Pak Chow never ceases to remind me that it is an honor to be able to write your biography, and he is right. Thank you for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. On behalf of my team, I would like to wish you good health and an early, happy 80th birthday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Peh. Next, I would like to invite the protagonist of Standing Tall, Emeritus Senior Minister, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, to give his remarks. ESM Goh, if you may.
Thank you, Shing Huei. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Mrs. Lee, dear friends. Thank you, PM, for doing me the high honor of launching both volumes of my biography, Tall Order, in November 2018, and Standing Tall today. Peh Shing Huei, my biographer, has done a marvelous job in capturing the highs and lows of my political life, the tough and sometimes painful decisions I had to make as a 2G leader and Prime Minister, in a fast-paced narrative that is easy and enjoyable to read. Thank you, Shing Huei, and your team in that graph. The dialogues I had with Shing Huei, with Han Fuk Kwang present, required me not just to recollect, but also to reflect. Hence my reflections after each chapter in Standing Tall, to share with readers the important lessons on Singapore politics and governance, which I've distilled from my life's journey. My main objective of doing my biography is to encourage present and future generations of able Singaporeans to serve their country. My concern is that many have assumed that their good lives will continue indefinitely and have not fully understood that the complex task of keeping Singapore going requires an effective pipeline of good, dedicated, and inspiring leaders. My call is even more pressing today. We are in the midst of another political transition. Carefully managed political succession has been the hallmark of Singapore politics since independence. It has given us political predictability, stability, and good governance. Let me illustrate from my empirical observations. Hindsight is always clearer than foresight. I have always found it instructive and useful to learn from retrospection. The government sent me to study development economics in Williams College, USA, in 1966. It was a special course for young officials from developing countries. My class of 20 came from 16 countries. After the course, I tracked the fortunes of my classmates through the fate of their countries. 3 of the 16 countries broke apart into smaller states: Pakistan, Yugoslavia, and Ethiopia. 3 were convulsed by revolutions or violence: Philippines, Egypt, and Liberia. Others had patchy performance: Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Bolivia, Colombia, and Honduras. Malaysia, India, and Mexico did relatively well. Singapore was the only one which became an advanced high-income country. So I wrote in one of the reflections in Standing Tall, quote, "I have watched the fortunes of many countries. I have long concluded that it is the competence, iron, and the ethical values of political leaders which ultimately determine the fate of countries," unquote. This is the primary lesson which I want to transmit through my biography. The future of a country depends on its leaders. Good leaders institute good governance. Good governance delivers a safe, secure, stable, and conducive environment for its people to grow, compete, succeed, and flourish. Therefore, leaders impact our lives and our future, for better or for worse. Just see how the fortunes of my classmates at Williams College were impacted by their leaders. Good leaders should possess integrity, iron, intelligence, and be inspiring and impactful. I call these attributes the 5 I's. I do not believe that good leaders will automatically emerge in a democracy, nor that the whims of elections can guarantee a slate of the best to govern the country. For democracy to work, ours anyway, we must offer the best candidates possible for the people to choose. Indeed, we scour the country for a diversified slate of the most suitable candidates from each generation to helm the country as MPs and ministers. Contrary to what some people believe, the PAP does not seek to perpetuate itself. It seeks to perpetuate good governance, values, institutions, and practices. There has been a hiccup in the political transition to the 4G. It is part of the process. There were also hiccups before the old guard passed on the baton to the 2G. I recounted these hiccups in my first volume, Tall Order. I commend DPM Heng Swee Keat. Where is Swee Keat? Yes. I commend you on your self-sacrifice in stepping aside as leader of the 4G. It takes courage and selflessness to do this when one is only a step away from being Prime Minister. He has put the interests of Singapore first, like a good leader should. The process of orderly political transition continues. My advice to the 4G is continue working closely as a team to set the agenda for Singapore. Show confidence and leadership as a group. Hone your political skills and prepare yourselves to take over the reins from the 3G. Deliberate carefully who amongst you should be the leader, and band together to support the leader once a decision is made. To my fellow Singaporeans, give the 4G some time to decide on their primus inter pares. This is an important decision for Singapore and for our next lap. The leader so chosen will have to lead his peers like the captain of a soccer team. They will have to work together to produce the best results for the people, just as a soccer team has to click to win matches for its fans. The whole must always be greater than the sum of its parts. Some people think that political succession is an internal PAP problem. They cannot be more wrong. It is a national issue. We need people of ability and integrity to serve the nation. Many have answered the call, and more must do so. Good leadership is the only way to keep Singapore going, growing and glowing to SG 100 and beyond. Will Singapore be growing in SG 100? In 2065, will the world write about the miracle of a Singapore century of stability, growth, and prosperity? Or will they use us as a case study of how an outstanding nation became an ordinary country like any other, or worse, a failed state? Singapore is a city-state, not a big country. If able people fail to step out into the political arena, or if we do not signal strong support for good leaders, Singapore's drop will be more precipitous than its rise. I hope readers will enjoy reading Standing Tall, understand the challenges of keeping Singapore going, and appreciate the importance of good national leaders. Thank you all for coming to the book launch. All of you are here because you have played a part in my premiership. I want to thank in particular my colleagues who had served with me, Tony Tan, Jakumar, Wong Kan Seng, Dhanabalan, Ahmad Mata, and others who are with us here today, as well as those who are not. Let me add that Ong Teng Cheong was an invaluable member of my team. We had regular pre-cabinet meetings and lunches. We enjoyed good camaraderie. Our warm personal relations allowed us to speak frankly and debate issues thoroughly, often with some good-natured banter. We might have had different points of view, but once a decision was made, all of us rallied behind it. We trusted each other. We worked as a team with members looking out for one another. We had a shared sense of purpose. We were united. Without a team, I would not have succeeded as Prime Minister, nor would Singapore have grown and flourished. Lastly, of course, I thank PM for being an indispensable member of my cabinet. One day, you have to write the sequel to my story and to the Singapore story of Lee Kuan Yew. Let us all do our part to keep Singapore standing tall. Thank you again.
Thank you, ESM Goh. And now I would like to invite our guest of honor, Prime Minister Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, to the stage to give his speech, and then to launch Standing Tall, the Goh Chok Tong Years, and 登高万元吴作东传第二集. Thank you.
Emeritus Senior Minister Goh Chok Tong and Mrs. Goh, colleagues and friends, a very good evening to all of you. I am extremely honored to be invited by Chok Tong once again to launch the second volume of his biography, Standing Tall. As he told you, I had launched the first volume, Tall Order, in 2018, and that became a national bestseller. And I hope and I have every confidence that the second volume will be just as successful. Those who have read the first book will have higher expectations of the second. Having read both volumes, I can assure you, you won't be disappointed. I commend Peh Shing Huei, Chok Tong's biographer, and his team, once again capturing his story in an interesting, fast-paced, and enjoyable read. This second volume is about Chok Tong's time as Prime Minister. In it, he recounts how he dealt with several major crises during his term, including the SQ-117 hijacking in 1991, the Asian financial crisis in 1997, and the SARS outbreak in 2003. Younger leaders will have much to learn about these landmarks in Singapore's recent history, and will perhaps gain a better appreciation of how Singapore got here today. For those who lived through these events, Chok Tong's accounts and reflections will give you a first-hand perspective. He explains the choices and trade-offs he had to make as Prime Minister. And that should help you to understand developments and decisions that may have puzzled you at the time. I worked closely with Chok Tong in most of these events, supporting him as his DPM. As a participant, reading the book brought back many memories. But I was also pleasantly surprised to learn some new things too. Now, in the midst of COVID-19, Chok Tong's account of the SARS outbreak is particularly timely. SARS was less infectious than COVID-19, but far deadlier. Singapore was one of the first countries to be hit by SARS. At first, no one knew what the new disease was or how severe the outbreak would be. The government had no playbook for dealing with such a crisis. Chok Tong mounted a maximum national response to stem the spread of SARS. He marshaled the whole government machinery: temperature taking, contact tracing, quarantining of contacts, screening protocols at our borders and public spaces, mobilizing resources at all the hospitals, closing schools to reassure parents. All were part of the strategy to detect, isolate, and contain. He also rallied the nation behind him and his team. He wrote a personal letter addressed to every Singaporean. It explained the situation to them calmly and clearly, what we needed to do, individually and together. People understood what was at stake, took heart, and each one of us played our part to win the fight. Chok Tong was driven by a deep concern for the safety and well-being of Singaporeans. In private, he shared his worries and fears with close confidants. He was anguished about each SARS death that occurred, particularly those of the brave medical workers. One of his Marine Parade activists recalled him exclaiming, "My people are dying. These are my people." But SARS strengthened his resolve to do his duty and to keep Singaporeans safe. SARS did not break Singapore either. Instead, it made us stronger. So that when COVID hit us 17 years later, we were better prepared. We adapted the measures that had worked for us in SARS. But COVID-19 is a new and different disease and has demanded fresh thinking and responses from us. But the SARS experience gave us a baseline to work from and a head start in bringing COVID-19 under control. We are far from out of the woods yet. Right now, we are working hard to stamp out 2 big clusters, which is why we've had to tighten up our restrictions again. But having overcome SARS once, we are confident that despite all the twists and turns, we will overcome COVID-19 too. The period when Chok Tong was PM was something of a golden age for Singapore. Globalization was picking up steam, international trade and investments were growing rapidly, our economy grew strongly. Incomes and standards of living rose year after year. This progress was changing Singapore society. A younger generation was coming of age. They were different from their parents who had lived through and fought for independence. They had different values, more ambitious aspirations, and a distinct view of what they wanted Singapore to be. The times called for a new leader with a fresh approach and touch, a leader very different from Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Milder, gentler, and more personal than Mr. Lee, yet no less clear-headed and steady. Chok Tong was the right leader at the right time. He set out to forge a new social compact with Singaporeans. He established connections with people in his own way, to walk in his own shoes, as he put it. The change of gear suited that period in Singapore's development. The kinder and gentler Singapore that Chok Tong talked about resonated with the new generation. Chok Tong's team pursued policies which reflected this shift. They sought to share economic gains more inclusively across society, spread opportunities more widely and equitably, extend a bigger helping hand to the lower income and vulnerable, level up our society, and leave no one behind. In education, Chok Tong introduced Edusave to motivate students across the whole spectrum of abilities to strive for excellence. In housing, HDB upgrading enhanced the value of HDB homes and gave Singaporeans bigger stakes in our country's success. Upgrading rejuvenated older housing estates too, including Marine Parade, his own constituency. Chok Tong lavished care and attention on Marine Parade and tested many new ideas there to implement nationally across Singapore. In healthcare, MediFund reassured Singaporeans that no one would be denied medical care because they couldn't afford it. And this has become a fundamental principle of our healthcare policy. MediFund was a nuanced but significant shift from the government's heavy emphasis on self-reliance to also strengthening social safety nets for lower income and vulnerable Singaporeans. MediFund was one step towards building the compassionate, inclusive society that Chok Tong envisioned. It's since been followed by many more measures: workfare, the progressive wage model, and silver support. We continue to travel on this journey which Chok Tong first began. We constantly try to balance the demands for greater social justice and more equal opportunities with the imperative to keep our schemes financially sustainable and give our people every incentive to strive and to excel. Of course, Chok Tong did not do all this alone, and he always gave generous credit to his team. As Mr. Lee once said, being PM is like being the conductor of an orchestra. No Prime Minister ever achieves much without an able team of players. And therein lies one of Chok Tong's greatest strengths: his ability to persuade able people to work for him, bring out the best in each of them, and gel them into a loyal and cohesive team. He personally persuaded, pressed, persisted, and more often than not, eventually prevailed in getting many of us to make the life-changing decision to enter politics. Lim Boon Heng, Yeo Ning Hong, Abdullah Tamuji, Wong Kan Seng, Lee Boon Yang, George Yeo, Lim Heng Kiang, Liu Chi Hian, Yaakob Ibrahim, Lim Swee Say, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, Khaw Boon Wan, Ng Eng Hen, Vivian Balakrishnan, President Halima Yaakob, and of course myself. All of us were brought in by him. With President Halima, he succeeded only on the third try. His peers of his own generation, like Ong Teng Cheong, Tony Tan, Jayakumar, Dana Balan, and Ahmad Mata, supported him too and helped him to succeed. His cabinets were strong teams that blended older and younger ministers. In terms of depth and breadth of talent and experience, they were arguably among the strongest cabinets that Singapore has had. This meant that when I took over as PM, I inherited a strong and experienced team. I benefited greatly from their support and advice. And of course from Chok Tong's too, because Chok Tong was kind enough to agree to my request to stay on in the cabinet as senior minister. He was an invaluable source of support and counsel, and still is, long after leaving cabinet. He tells one story in the book about the handover. Chok Tong wanted me to take over as PM soon after National Day, so that I could start my term by delivering a National Day rally speech straight away. I agreed. For my speech, he gave me a piece of advice. He said, spend less time talking about policies and more time to let Singaporeans know who you are as a person. The most important thing is to build rapport with Singaporeans. And this was wise advice, which I have since passed on to newer ministers and MPs. In the same way, I aim to hand over a strong team to my successors. The 4G ministers have accumulated experience in a wide range of portfolios and established themselves. With COVID-19, a generational crisis, they've made tough decisions in the thick of the fight and been battle-tested. One thing they have yet to do, after DPM Heng Swee Keat stepped aside as their leader, is to settle on someone from among themselves to lead them as first amongst equals, primus inter pares. As they consider their choice, they can have no better template than Chok Tong and his team. Whoever will be Prime Minister of Singapore must first and foremost be someone who can bring the rest together. Pull them together, make the most of the strengths of each minister, and make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. And that was the secret of Chok Tong's successful premiership. The recent cabinet reshuffle will give the 4G ministers a chance to work together with one another in new capacities as a team, to strengthen their mutual understanding and teamwork, and to prepare themselves to take over from me and my older colleagues. Only after that has happened will I have earned the right to think about writing the sequel that Chok Tong spoke about. Persuading good people to join politics is an increasingly difficult task. It's a challenge that Chok Tong and I share as PMs. We talk about this often at our regular lunches. In fact, as he said earlier, this was his main motivation in writing his biography, to inspire more people to take the plunge into politics and to serve Singapore. Chok Tong writes candidly about these difficulties. The opportunity costs are significant. You probably have to give up a promising career, because if your career is not promising, we probably wouldn't ask you. And you lose privacy for yourself and maybe your family members, because you're constantly under scrutiny and criticism, especially now with the social media and cancel culture. But regardless of how difficult the task, we must persevere. Singaporeans deserve the best people that can be found and developed to serve and to lead them, as one united national team. It's the only way to maintain the quality of government that Singaporeans have got used to, and the only way to maintain the confidence in Singapore that attracts investments and create jobs, and the only way to assure the country's success and to secure the future for our children and grandchildren. Finally, let me thank Chok Tong for a lifetime of selfless and distinguished service. It was always a tall order to keep Singapore standing tall. And now that we are standing taller, the order has also gotten taller. But you have succeeded and handed over a better Singapore to your successors. And now your successors will strive to do the same. Thank you, Chok Tong, for giving your all and more to the service of Singapore and Singaporeans. I wish you and Tu Ling good health and all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. If you could please remain on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to invite Mr. Peh Shing Huei onto the stage. Mr. Peh will present a signed set of the English and Chinese editions of Standing Tall to the Prime Minister and to take a photo with him. I would now like to invite Emeritus Senior Minister Mr. Goh Chok Tong to the stage. ESM Goh will present a personalized copy of the English edition of Standing Tall to the Prime Minister. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Doreen Liu, Group Managing Director of World Scientific, Ms. Chong Siak Ching, CEO of National Gallery Singapore, and Ms. Li Hui Ling, Head of the Chinese Media Group of SPH, to join the group on the stage for our final group photo. Thank you all. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our program. As Ms. Liu, Ms. Chong, and Ms. Lee return to their seats, I would like to ask all other guests to remain seated as PM Lee and ESM take their leave.